In the summer of 1845, two powerful British warships sailed into the Arctic with 129 men aboard. They carried years of provisions, experienced naval officers, steam engines, and some of the most advanced technology of their time. Then, they vanished. No survivors returned. No complete account of what happened was ever recovered. For more than a century and a half, the fate of Sir John Franklin and his men remained one of the great mysteries of exploration. What happened after the ships became trapped in the ice? Why did 129 men disappear into one of the most hostile environments on Earth? And perhaps, most haunting of all, how did two ships that vanished in the 1840s eventually reappear beneath Arctic waters more than 160 years later? This is the story of Franklin's Lost Expedition, a journey that began as a quest for a legendary passage and ended as one of the Arctic's most enduring mysteries. In the 19th century, Britain was obsessed with finding the Northwest Passage, a navigable route through the Arctic connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. For European explorers, it promised strategic importance, prestige, and a shorter route between the great oceans. In 1845, the Royal Navy chose Sir John Franklin to lead the expedition. Franklin was not an inexperienced adventurer. He was a career naval officer who had fought in the Napoleonic Wars and had already explored parts of the Canadian Arctic. But this expedition would be different. Franklin would command two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror. Both had already seen Arctic service. They were reinforced for the ice, fitted with steam engines, and loaded with supplies intended to sustain the expedition for years. On May 19, 1845, the expedition left Greenhive, England. There were 134 officers and crew members at departure, but after reaching Greenland, 5 men were sent home. That left 129 aboard the two ships. They continued westward into the Arctic. For a time, everything seemed to be going according to plan. By the summer of 1845, Erebus and Terror had entered the Arctic. In July, Inuit hunters saw the ships in the waters near Greenland. Those would become some of the last confirmed sightings of the expedition while it was still together. The ships sailed onward. Then came the winter. The expedition spent the winter of 1845 to 46 at Beechey Island. There, the men established a camp and waited for the Arctic conditions to change. But the Arctic does not follow a naval timetable. When the expedition moved south toward King William Island, the ships eventually became trapped in sea ice. By September 1846, Erebus and Terror were immobilized, and they would remain there. Month after month, the men waited. The ice did not release them. The expedition was no longer simply an exploration voyage. It had become a struggle against time. The men had food, they had equipment, they had ships. But they were surrounded by an environment that could make all of those advantages meaningless. Then, on June 11th, 1847, Sir John Franklin died. The expedition had lost its commander. Yet, the survivors remained aboard the ships. They waited through another Arctic winter. And by the spring of 1848, the situation had become desperate. In April 1848, Francis Crozier and James Fitzjames recorded a message at a stone cairn near Victory Point. The document contained two very different moments in the expedition's history. The first message, written in May 1847, had reported that the expedition had wintered at Beechey Island and that all was well. The second message, added nearly a year later, was devastating. 24 officers and men had died, including Franklin. The ships had been trapped in the ice since September 1846, and now the remaining 105 men had abandoned them. They planned to travel overland toward the Great Fish River, now known as the Back River. The expedition's ships were no longer their escape. They were becoming their tombs. The men began hauling boats and supplies across the frozen landscape of King William Island. Imagine the scale of that journey. There were more than 100 exhausted men. They had to carry equipment across difficult terrain while already weakened by months in the Arctic. The destination was hundreds of miles away, and there was no guarantee that they would reach it. Some would die along the route. Others would disappear without leaving a clear record of their final days. In the years that followed, Inuit living in the region would provide crucial information about what happened. They reported seeing groups of European men traveling south. They also reported bodies and abandoned equipment. European searchers eventually found physical evidence of the retreat, including human remains, clothing, books, and other objects. The evidence suggested that the expedition had not simply vanished. It had slowly collapsed. But one enormous question remained. Where were the ships? For decades, searchers crossed the Arctic looking for them. The Franklin mystery became larger with every failed expedition. And gradually, another important source of information became impossible to ignore. Inuit oral histories had preserved accounts of encounters with Franklin's men and information about the locations of the lost ships. For generations, Inuit knowledge of the Arctic landscape had been passed down through experience and memory. Modern researchers eventually recognized that these accounts could help narrow the search. That would become crucial more than 160 years later. Beginning in 2008, Parks Canada and its partners launched a new, systematic search for the wrecks. The strategy combined modern underwater technology with Inuit knowledge. The search was difficult. Arctic waters are accessible for only a short period each year. Ice, weather, distance, and enormous search areas all worked against the archaeologists, but the teams kept returning. Then, in September 2014, a clue appeared on land. Archaeologists investigating a small island discovered pieces of material associated with a 19th century British naval ship. Among them was a metal fitting identified as a davit pintle, along with a wooden artifact. The search area shifted, and on September 2nd, 2014, sonar produced an extraordinary image. There, beneath the Arctic water, was the unmistakable shape of a ship, HMS Erebus. The ship Franklin had commanded was no longer simply a name in an old mystery. It was physically there, resting on the seafloor. The discovery transformed the investigation, but one ship was still missing, HMS Terror. 2 years later, in 2016, researchers were searching again. Then, an unexpected piece of information changed the search. An Inuk named Sammy Kogvik shared information about seeing evidence of a ship in an area that had not been the team's main focus. The research vessel Martin Bergman investigated. Its sonar passed over something beneath the water, a shipwreck. Archaeologists examined the evidence. The identity was confirmed. It was HMS Terror. For the first time, both ships of Franklin's lost expedition had been located. One had been discovered in 2014, the other in 2016. The ships that had disappeared in the Arctic in the 1840s had finally been found beneath the same waters where the expedition's story had ended, and the discoveries created an extraordinary archaeological opportunity. The wrecks were remarkably preserved. Inside Terror, archaeologists found evidence of a ship that had remained surprisingly intact beneath the Arctic Sea. Cabins, fittings, and other features survived underwater. The wrecks became time capsules. They offered researchers the possibility of learning not only where the ships ended up, but how the expedition actually lived during its final years. The discovery of Erebus and Terror did not solve every mystery. In fact, it created new questions. Exactly how did each ship sink? Why did the men abandon them when they did? What happened to individual members of the crew during their final journey? And what caused the expedition to fail, despite its preparation and supplies? Researchers continue to study the wrecks, recovered artifacts, environmental evidence, and Inuit knowledge. Some explanations have been proposed over the years, including disease, nutritional problems, extreme cold, starvation, and other effects of prolonged Arctic hardship. But no single explanation should be treated as the complete answer. The evidence points to a prolonged disaster rather than one simple moment of failure. And perhaps the most important lesson of the Franklin story is that European records were never the only source of information. Inuit knowledge played a fundamental role in understanding the expedition, and ultimately helped guide the modern search for the wrecks. Today, Erebus and Terror form a protected historic site in Nunavut, cooperatively managed by Parks Canada and Inuit. For more than 160 years, Franklin's expedition existed somewhere between history and mystery. Now, 2 ships lie beneath Arctic waters, carrying evidence of the men who disappeared with them. But the Arctic still has secrets, and perhaps somewhere inside those silent wrecks is the final piece of a story that began in England in 1845. What do you think ultimately doomed Franklin's expedition? Leave your theory in the comments. And if you want more true stories from the places where history, mystery, and human survival collide, subscribe for the next documentary.